The road into Caldenmore was not on any official map. I had 3 such maps in my saddlebag, one drawn by the cartographers of Velmark, one by the surveyors of the Ashfin Crown, one commissioned by my own council, and none of them agreed on the reach's borders, its population, or even the name of the pass through the Grenell Mountains. What they agreed on was this: Caldenmore was ungoverned territory sitting between 3 wolf kingdoms, and all 3 wanted it. What they did not agree on was who would get it, and what method would be used. My council wanted me to send a regiment. I had sent myself instead, which had produced, in the council chamber, the particular silence that falls when powerful men realize they cannot actually stop their king from doing something inadvisable. I had told them it was a scouting mission. I had told them I needed accurate information before signing an annexation order that would affect several thousand people whose lives none of my advisors had ever troubled to learn anything about. I had told them I would be gone 3 weeks, that I would travel as a private citizen, a wandering scout named Rin, and that I expected to return with a complete picture. All of that was true. What I did not tell them was that my wolf had been restless for 6 months. Not anxious, not aggressive, just restless in the way of a creature that knows something is near and cannot identify what. I had ruled Caldenmore's neighboring territory of Veldrath for 19 years. I had never had a mate. I had stopped expecting one. But for 6 months, my wolf had been tilting its head in a direction it could not name, and when the Caldenmore question landed on my desk, something in me had gone very still, and I had picked up my own cloak instead of reaching for the dispatch order. I told myself it was good governance. Perhaps it was. The pass through the Grenells was miserable in late autumn, ice on the rocks, a wind that found every gap in my traveling cloak, and a horse named Bren who expressed his opinions about the altitude in terms I will not repeat. We came down out of the mountains on the 4th day, into a valley that was quieter than I expected and greener than the maps suggested, and I found the road that was not on any map and followed it east toward the only light I could see. The light came from a building. The building was a long, low-beamed stone inn at the edge of a settlement that was perhaps 400 people by my estimation, a mix of timber houses, a smithy, a mill, 2 or 3 traders' stalls, and a great deal of mud. The inn had a sign above the door that read the GREYMARCH in letters that had once been painted and were now mostly optimism and memory. There was smoke coming from 2 chimneys. There was a lamp burning in the window, yellow and steady. There were voices inside, the low, variable sound of a room with many kinds of people in it, and underneath that, the smell of bread. I had been 4 days on cold road. I am not ashamed to say the bread decided it. I tied Bren at the post, straightened my gray traveling cloak, and went in. The common room of the Greymark was full. Not full in the way of a feast hall, full in the way of a place that has become necessary. Every table was occupied. A group of men I made as traders from Ashfin by their accent and their goods, eating quietly in the corner. A pair of men whose posture and the calluses on their hands I recognized as former soldiers, now eating the kind of meal that suggested they were very hungry and had been for some time. A woman nursing a child at a table near the fire, alone. 3 men near the back whose collective bearing suggested they had at some point or another come into conflict with various kinds of law and were currently observing a ceasefire with the concept. All of them were eating. The room smelled of pine resin from the fire and something long cooked and warm. Behind the bar, a woman was talking to someone. I noticed her the way you notice a fixed point when everything else is moving. She was perhaps in her middle 30s, dark-haired, plain dressed in linen and a heavy apron, her hair pulled back with the practicality of someone who has not had time to think about her hair. She was not beautiful in any dramatic sense. She had a calm face, the kind of face that has learned to be still because stillness is useful. She was speaking to the man across the bar, one of the former outlaw types from the back table, who had apparently come to register some kind of complaint. and I could see from the set of her shoulders that she had already heard the complaint and formed her response, and was now waiting for him to finish speaking before she delivered it. He finished. She said something. I could not hear it from the door, but the man's shoulders dropped half an inch, and he turned and went back to his table. My wolf went quiet in a way it had not gone quiet in 6 months. Not alert, not tense. Quiet the way a creature goes quiet when it has found what it was looking for and does not want to startle it. I crossed the room to the bar. She looked up when I reached it. Her eyes were gray, a particular kind of gray, the color of still water in a stone basin, clear and specific. She looked at me the way she had looked at the outlaw, attentively, without performance, reading something. "Traveling through," she said. "Looking for a room if there is one," I said, "and a meal if there's anything left." "There's a room," she said, "and there's stew, sit anywhere that's empty." She did not ask my name. She did not ask where I was from or where I was going, which is what every innkeeper in every town I had ever ridden through as a private citizen had asked within the first 30 seconds. She turned back to whatever she had been doing at the bar, which appeared to be going through accounts with a patience that suggested the accounts were not cooperating, and left me to find my own seat. I found a table near the window. I sat down. A girl of about 14 brought stew, thick, properly seasoned, with good bread on the side, and I ate and watched. What I watched was the innkeeper run her room. It was a particular kind of skill, and I recognized it because it is the same skill required to run a kingdom, only practiced at closer quarters with less ceremony and more immediate consequence. She moved between tables without hurry. She refilled a cup here, said a word there. The woman nursing the child by the fire, I saw her lean over and say something, and the woman nodded, and something in her face eased. The former soldiers in the middle of the room, who had been watching everyone with the wariness of men who had learned not to lower their guard, I watched one of them, between one exchange with the innkeeper and the next, unwind his shoulders by about a 1/4 inch. Not much, but enough. She made the room safe by being the steadiest thing in it. I have ruled a kingdom for 19 years. I have sat in council with men whose political intelligence I genuinely respect. I have never seen anyone manage a room the way she managed that room, without authority, without position, without rank, with nothing but her own consistent, unhurried presence. My wolf, still quiet, settled a little lower, the way it settles when it has decided something. I told it, not yet. I told it, we do not know anything yet. I told it, we are here to assess an ungoverned territory for potential annexation, not to. My wolf, as it frequently does when I attempt to reason with it, ignored me entirely. I asked for a second cup of tea at the bar when the dinner hour was winding down, and she brought it, and I said, "You run this place alone." "I have merit for the kitchen and Dav for the yard," she said. "Otherwise, yes." "How long?" "8 years," she said. "And before that?" She looked at me, that attentive, reading look. "You ask a lot of questions for a passing scout." "Occupational habit," I said, which was entirely true. 8 years ago I came through on the road and there was no inn," she said, "and there needed to be one, so I stayed and built it, that's all." She said it the way people say things that contain a great deal more than the words suggest, in a tone that closes the subject. I recognize that tone too. I use it myself in council when I have made a decision, and am not interested in discussing the reasoning. "And the name," I said, "the Grey Mark." "It's what the locals call this stretch of the reach," she said. "The Grey March, the grey land between, no man's territory." She looked at me steadily. "Has been for a long time. 3 kingdoms want it. None of them have come for it yet." "They'll come eventually," I said. "They might," she said. "People are working on it." She said it without looking away, and I had the sudden, clear impression that she was aware that I was not a passing scout and was choosing not to say so, which was, in its own way, an extraordinary form of courtesy. Rooms at the top of the left stair, she said. Fire's been banked. Merritt will have breakfast at first light. Thank you, I said. She nodded and went back to her accounts. I lay in the narrow room at the top of the left stair. Good mattress, clean linens, a fire that was doing exactly what a banked fire should, and I looked at the ceiling and thought about what I was going to do. The annexation order was in my saddlebag. I had 3 maps that disagreed with each other, and a council waiting for my report, and a kingdom that had legitimate governance interests in the Reach. None of that had changed. My wolf was, for the first time in 6 months, entirely still. I stayed a week, then I stayed another. I told myself I was gathering information. This was not entirely a lie. I was gathering information. In 14 days in Caldenmore, I learned more about the Reach than my 3 maps contained between them. I learned that the settlement's population was closer to 600 than 400, that there were 3 smaller steadings within a half-day's ride of the main hold, that the mill was the economic anchor of the area, that the traders from Ashfin paid their way and caused no trouble, that 2 of Velmark's scouts had been through 3 weeks earlier asking questions about the pass, and that there were about 40 people in the hold who were carrying various degrees of legal complication from their previous lives in one or more of the 3 neighboring kingdoms, and that all of them, without exception, behaved themselves inside the borders of Caldenmore with a consistency that was more impressive than anything I had seen from fully governed populations. I asked one of the former soldiers, a man named Othen, who had fought for Ashfin and then stopped fighting for anyone, why that was. He looked at me for a moment, then looked toward the bar, where Sella was arbitrating what appeared to be a property dispute between 2 women in terms so reasonable that both parties seemed faintly surprised by themselves. Because she doesn't pretend it's easy, Othen said, and she doesn't pretend it doesn't matter. She just holds the line, every day, without making a performance of it. He took a drink of his ale. People respond to that, he said. Men who spent their whole lives being lied to by people with authority, they respond to someone who just does the work. No theater, no promises, just the work. He looked at me steadily. You're not really a scout, he said. I'm gathering information, I said. Yes, he said, I imagine you are. He finished his ale. I hope it's useful to whoever sent you. I did not tell him that I had sent myself. On the 9th day I came down early, before the rest of the room was awake, and found Sella in the kitchen going through what remained of the week's provisions. She was standing at the table with a wrapped cloth of bread in front of her, and a look on her face that was the careful arithmetic of someone who has less than she needs, and is deciding how to make it sufficient. She heard me on the stair and looked up. There's tea, she said. Merritt hasn't been in yet. I'll have something hot shortly. I'm not in a hurry, I said. I sat at the kitchen table. She had not invited me, but she had not told me to go away, which in Sella's communication register I had come to understand was the equivalent of a warm welcome, and watched her work. After a moment she said, I'm short on bread this week. Flour shipment from the mill is delayed. There's enough for breakfast for the room if I'm careful. She said it without looking up. I'll have yours first if you're up early. Save it, I said. I'll eat later. She looked up at that. The gray eyes studied me. Suit yourself, she said. Though I'll feed you regardless. That's the agreement you paid for the room and meals. I know, I said. Save the bread anyway. Give it to someone who needs it more. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she said, the woman by the fire, Dina. She's been here 3 weeks. She's out of money. I've been carrying her tab. Then give it to Dina, I said. Sella set the bread cloth down, and something in her face, not quite a smile, more a kind of careful, private recognition, shifted almost imperceptibly. All right, she said, thank you. I felt the mark on my wrist, then for the first time. Not pain, warmth. A warmth under the skin, beginning at the bone of my inner wrist, spreading along the line of a vein in a pattern I knew from the old stories, and had never expected to feel in my own body, in a cold kitchen before dawn, sitting across from a woman who had just given her last bread to someone who needed it more than either of us. My wolf was not quiet anymore. My wolf was completely, utterly certain. I pressed my hand against my thigh to keep from looking at my wrist. I kept my face still. I had 19 years of practice keeping my face still in moments when the thing happening inside me was larger than anything I knew how to say. "I'll get the tea," Sela said, and turned to the fire. I sat with the warmth spreading up my arm and thought, I cannot sign the annexation order. Not because it was wrong, it might not have been wrong. The Reach needed governance. 3 kingdoms wanted it. One of them would take it eventually, and better mine than Velmark's, and better mine than the Ashfin crowns, both of which had made their intentions toward the Reach's current residents quite clear through the nature of their scouts' questions. Under my rule, the hold would be protected. The people would have law and structure and defense. But if I signed the order from my saddlebag, Caldenmore would become a territory of Veldrath. And Sela, who had come through 8 years ago and found no inn and stayed to build one, who ran the only functioning piece in an ungoverned stretch of 3 kingdoms' borders, who gave her last bread to a woman who couldn't pay, and then thanked the man who made her feel she could, Sela would become a citizen of my kingdom, and I would become her king, and I would have done that to her without asking. The mate bond does not care about governance structures or annexation orders. The mate bond does not care about 19 years of careful, deliberate rule. It simply arrives, warm as bread, quiet as a banked fire, and the world reorganizes itself around it. But I cared. I had always believed that power used without consent, even power that was well-intentioned, even power that might have been beneficial, was still a kind of taking. I had spent 19 years trying to rule accordingly. I was not going to stop now, because the circumstances had become personally inconvenient. She brought the tea. She set it in front of me with the particular economy of movement that I had spent 2 weeks watching, nothing wasted, nothing performed. "You've been here 2 weeks," she said. She sat down at the table across from me, which was new. Usually she stood. "That's not a scout schedule." "No," I said, "it isn't." She looked at me steadily. "Who are you actually?" I thought about the annexation order in my saddlebag. I thought about her gray eyes and the warmth moving up my arm. "Someone who needs a little more time," I said, "if you'll give it." She was quiet for a moment. "The envoys will come in about 3 weeks," she said. "All 3 of them. It happens every winter. They come to make their arguments for governance of the Reach. I've managed them before. But this year there are more of them, and they're less willing to hear no." She looked at her hands around her cup. "I need to know who I'm talking to before they arrive." "I know," I said. "I'll tell you before they come. I give you my word." She looked up. She was reading me again with that particular attentiveness, looking for the thing underneath the words, which had always been where the actual information was. "All right," she said. That was all. All right. The simplest of truces, and she had extended it across the kitchen table over a cup of tea at dawn, and I sat with my wolf settled and the warmth moving steadily up my arm and thought, I have ruled a kingdom for 19 years, and I have never been as grateful for anything as I am for those 2 words. The 3rd week. I stopped pretending I was gathering information about Caldenmore and started simply being in it. I helped Othen and the other former soldiers repair the roof of the mill when a section of it gave way in the first real snowfall. I rode out with Dav to check on the outlying steadings when the pass to the north got ice, and the Stott farmers there needed someone to confirm the road was safe. I sat at the bar in the evenings and drank Sela's somewhat confrontational attempt at spiced cider, and listened to the room in the way I had been listening for 3 weeks, but without the assessment behind it now, without the annexation order, just the room. Sela and I had fallen into a shape. It was not romantic in any way I could have described clearly. It was quiet and functional and warm. She would set my cup down before I asked. I would take the last table needing clearing before she reached it. In the evenings she went over the accounts and I sat across from her, not helping, because she did not want or need my help with the accounts but present, and we talked, or did not talk, in whatever proportion the evening required. She asked me questions that were not about my name or my position. She asked what I had noticed, what I had found in the steadings, whether the North Pass ice was the early kind or the serious kind, whether I thought the Ashfin traders were staying through winter. She took my answers seriously, which is to say she disagreed with me when she disagreed with me, in terms that were direct and somewhat bracing and consistently correct. My wolf had stopped being a wolf. This is the only way I know how to describe it. It had stopped being a separate voice, and had become something quieter, deeper, the feeling of being entirely in the right place for the first time in 19 years. On the 17th night I came downstairs past midnight and found her still at the bar, the accounts put away, sitting with a cup of something she did not offer to explain. The fire was low. The room was empty except for us. I sat down. She did not look up. "They'll be here in 4 or 5 days, she said. "Yes," I said. "You said you'd tell me before they came." "Yes." She looked up then. The fire caught the side of her face. She was entirely still, the way she was still when she had already formed the answer and was waiting to see if the question confirmed it. "You're the Alpha King of Veldrath," she said. I was quiet for a moment. "Kale of Veldrath," I said. "Yes." She was quiet too. I watched her take the information in, not with shock, but with the careful, thorough processing of someone who has always preferred to know the actual situation. "You came to assess the reach," she said. "Yes." "For annexation." "Yes." "And," she said. "And I have an order in my saddlebag that I have not signed," I said. "I want to tell you why." She waited. "If I sign that order, Caldenmore becomes a territory of Veldrath," I said. "That means protection, law, resources, things this hold needs, and things I could genuinely provide. It also means I would have done it without your knowledge or consent, and I would become your king, and you would have had no say in that. And there is something else I need you to know that makes that impossible." She was still watching me, not afraid, simply waiting. "I came here because my wolf had been restless for months," I said. "I told myself it was good governance. It may have been good governance. But when I walked into this room 3 weeks ago, my wolf went quiet for the first time. And 9 days ago in your kitchen, when you gave your last bread to Dina." I turned my hand over on the bar. The mark was visible now. It had been growing for 9 days, a branching, warm thing along the inside of my wrist, faintly luminous in firelight, the pattern the old stories describe and most people never see in their own lifetimes. Sella looked at it. Then she looked at her own wrist, which she turned over in the same motion, and where her apron cuff had been covering the skin, there was the same warmth, the same faint branching, beginning, not as far along as mine because hers had been growing less time or because she had not known to look, but unmistakable. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she set her hand down on the bar, flat, and was quiet. "That's why I cannot sign the order," I said, "not without telling you first. Not without asking you, separately, without the governance question involved, what you want. Because you are my fated mate, and that is the largest thing I know, and it is entirely separate from what happens to Caldenmore. I need you to understand that those are 2 different questions, and I will answer them separately if you prefer." Sella was quiet for what felt like a long time. "2 different questions," she said at last. "Yes." "The first question is what happens to the reach," she said. "Yes." "And the second question is what I want," she said. "Yes." She looked at the mark on her wrist again. She touched it with one finger, carefully, The way she touched things she was trying to understand. "I've been here 8 years," she said. "I built this place because it needed to exist. Because there were people who needed somewhere to be that wasn't inside one kingdom's agenda or another's." She looked up. "If Caldenmore becomes a territory of any of the 3 kingdoms, those people lose that. The ones who are carrying legal trouble from Velmark, from Ashfin, they lose the one place where none of that followed them." "I know," I said. "Can you protect them?" she said. "Not absorb them into Veldrath with all the same machinery that drove them here in the first place. Protect them, as they are, where they are." I had been thinking about this for 9 days, since the kitchen, since the bread. "Protected status," I said, "a different designation than annexation. The Reach would fall under the protection of Veldrath's borders, meaning Velmark and Ashfin couldn't touch it without full territorial incorporation. The Hold keeps its own governance, its own rules. Veldrath takes no taxes for 10 years. After 10 years, the Hold votes on its own status." She was listening. "My council will not like it," I said. "It is an unusual arrangement. I will spend considerable political capital making it work." "Why would you do that?" she said. "Because it is the right answer for the people here," I said. "That has always been the actual question, not which kingdom benefits, but what these people need." She was quiet again. The fire had dropped further. The room was very still. "And the second question," she said. "I am not asking you to answer it tonight," I said. "I am asking you to know that it exists, that when the envoys come and the governance question is resolved, whatever is decided, the second question is entirely separate and entirely yours to answer, and there is no version of the outcome in which I would use one to compel the other." She looked at me for a long time. She had gray eyes and a calm face, and 8 years of building something that mattered in the only way that things actually matter, because it was needed, and she was there, and she stayed. She had asked me nothing about my rank or my kingdom or my power. She had given me her last bread not because I was a king, but because I was a person who had said, "Give it to someone who needs it more." "All right," she said. For the 3rd time since I had known her, "all right," the simplest and most considered thing she knew how to say. "All right to both," I said carefully. "All right to both," she said. "To protected status if you can make it work, and 2, she looked at the mark on her wrist, to finding out what this is." The envoys arrived on the 5th day. There were 7 of them between the 3 kingdoms, 2 from Velmark, 3 from the Ashfin crown, 2 from the southern holding of Drenvar, which had not been on any of my maps, and had apparently decided to make its interests in the Reach known at this particular moment out of sheer diplomatic inconvenience. They arrived in the late afternoon with an escort that was more than was needed for a diplomatic mission, and less than was needed for a military one, which meant they had brought it primarily to suggest an opinion. They found the Greymark. They found it occupied by the Alpha King of Veldrath, who was sitting at the bar drinking somewhat confrontational spiced cider. The head envoy of Velmark, a man named Corson, whom I knew slightly and respected marginally, stopped in the doorway and did the rapid reassessment of a man who had prepared extensively for a negotiation that has just changed its fundamental character. "My lord," he said, "we were not aware you were in the Reach." "I imagine not," I said. The room had gone quiet around them. Othen, at his usual table, had not visibly moved but had rearranged himself in the subtle way of a former soldier who is tracking all exits. Dav, behind me to the left, was doing the same. The Ashfin traders in the corner had put down their cups with careful neutrality. Behind the bar, Sela stood. She had her apron off, which I had not seen before, and was wearing a plain gray dress that was not remarkable except that it was clean, and she was standing very still, with the kind of stillness that is an active choice rather than an absence. "We are here to discuss the governance question of the Caldenmore Reach," the Ashfin head envoy, a woman named Vale, whom I did not know, said. She was looking at me with the careful expression of someone who is very good at her job and is currently improvising. All three parties have legitimate territorial claims, and the governance question of the Reach has been resolved, I said. Coruscant looked at me. Vale looked at me. The Drenvar pair, who had not spoken yet and seemed to be operating on a slight delay, looked at each other. By what authority? Coruscant said. Mine, I said, and by agreement with the hold. I set down my cup. Caldenmore is granted protected status under the borders of Veldrath, effective immediately by the authority of the Alpha King of Veldrath. No territorial incorporation. No taxation for 10 years. Hold governance remains with its own people. After 10 years, the hold votes on its own status. I looked at the 7 of them. Velmark, Ashvin, and Drenvar retain trading rights through the Grenell Pass on the Eastern Road, which will be protected by Veldrath's border agreement. In exchange, all three kingdoms acknowledge Caldenmore's protected status and withdraw any outstanding territorial claims. There was a silence of the kind that happens when people are doing very rapid calculations about whether arguing is worth the cost. Coruscant said very carefully, "This is an unusual arrangement." "Yes," I said, "it is the correct one." Vale said, "What does Veldrath gain from this?" I looked at her steadily. "A border that is stable, a pass that is protected, and a relationship with a hold that has been managing the peace in this stretch of the Reach for 8 years without any of our help." I paused, which should be informative if we are willing to learn from it. More silence. "We would need to consult with our principals," Coruscant said. "You have until morning," I said. "After that, I will send the protected status declaration by courier to all 3 capitals, and the matter will be formally closed." The 7 of them looked at each other. They did the thing that diplomatic parties do when they are all thinking the same thing simultaneously, a kind of collective recalibration that requires no words. Vale said, "We'll consider it." They took themselves to 2 of the Greymark's remaining rooms and presumably considered it. The room unwound slightly. Othen took a long drink of his ale. The traders went back to their cups. I turned back to the bar. Sella was looking at me. She had the same attentive, reading expression she'd worn the first night I walked in. But underneath it now was something else, something less guarded than her default, the look of a person who is in the process of revising what she expected. "That's one question," she said quietly. "That's one question," I agreed. She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at her wrist at the mark there, which had been growing quietly for 5 days now, branching and warm, visible in the right light. "The second question," she said. "Takes as long as you need," I said. "I meant that." "I know you meant it," she said. "That's why I'm answering it now." She held my gaze. "You rode into my hold as no one. You ate the stew and slept in the narrow room and fixed the mill roof and checked on the Stott farmers. You gave me your last bread back when I gave it to Dina. You spent 3 weeks being a person before you were a king." She paused. "I don't know how to feel about the king part. I expect it will take some time." "Yes," I said. "But the person part," she said, "that I know." She set her hand on the bar between us. The mark on her wrist caught the lamplight, warm, particular, the pattern of a bond that has been growing in secret for 3 weeks, arriving the way it always arrives in the old stories. Not in a throne room, not with ceremony, not announced by anything louder than a banked fire and bread being given freely to someone who needed it more. I set my hand beside hers. Not over it, beside it. Her choice always, that was the only way I knew how to do this. She looked at our hands on the bar. She looked at the marks, which in proximity had brightened slightly, the way they do in the stories, the 2 halves of one pattern, recognizing each other. Then she turned her hand and set it over mine. "Well," she said, with the careful, deliberate understatement of someone who processes large things quietly and privately. "All right." I did not say anything. I did not trust myself to say anything for a moment. She did not seem to require me to. She was looking at our hands with the expression she used for things she was trying to understand thoroughly before she acted on them. The careful, earnest attention she gave to accounts that didn't add up in property disputes and ice on the North Pass. The same quality of attention applied now to this. "I'm not leaving the Greymark," she said. "I know," I said. "I'll need to think about what the rest of it looks like. The Luna part, I don't know what that means for me specifically." "It means whatever you make it mean," I said. "There is no fixed shape for it. You can ask me anything you want to know, and I will tell you the truth, and then you decide." She looked at me. "That's a very unusual offer from a king," she said. "I'm in an unusual position," I said. "My fated mate runs an inn in ungoverned territory and feeds outlaws and arbitrates knife fights with her words. I expect I will need to adjust." Something shifted in her face at that. A small, private thing. The almost smile I had first seen in the kitchen when I told her to give the bread to Dina. "You'll manage," she said. The envoys agreed to the protected status arrangement by morning, which was partly because it was genuinely the correct governance solution, and partly because the alternative was a three-way territorial dispute with the Alpha King of Veldrath already in the room. Coruscant, to his credit, recognized a good outcome when it was placed in front of him. Vale, who was sharp and pragmatic, had reached the same conclusion by the small hours. The Drenvar pair signed because everyone else was signing. I sent 3 couriers by midday. The declarations went east, west, and south, through the Grenell Pass and down the roads that did not appear on official maps. By the time the first snowfall of earnest winter closed the pass, Caldenmore would be on the maps, protected, specific, its own thing. In the afternoon, I told the room. I stood in the center of the Greymark common room and told the 40-odd people who happened to be there what had been decided. Protected status, no incorporation, no taxation, hold governance remaining where it was, Veldrath's borders around them but not over them. I told them what it meant practically. The road would be maintained, the pass would be patrolled. The legal complications a number of them were carrying from their previous lives in other kingdoms would not follow them here, because Caldenmore was now a separate question. The room was quiet while I spoke. When I finished, Othen said, "Who decided this?" "The Alpha King of Veldrath," I said, "which is me and the hold." I looked at Sella, who was standing at the bar still watching. "Which is her?" Othen looked at Sella. Sella looked back at him with the expression she used for things that were already settled. "He's staying a few more days," she said, with the particular brevity that in her communication register constituted a comprehensive explanation. Othen looked at me. He was, I had learned over 3 weeks, a man who expressed approval primarily through the absence of criticism. "The stew's good tonight," he said, and went back to his table. I sent a letter to my council that afternoon. It was the most interesting letter I had written in 19 years of kingship. It explained the protected status arrangement in full, with the political reasoning, the border logic, and the diplomatic agreements. It explained that I would be returning to Veldrath in approximately 1 week. It explained that I would be accompanied by someone I intended to introduce to the council formally, and that the council should prepare for a conversation about the nature of the Luna's role that would be somewhat different from any they had had before. I read it back and decided it was honest and sent it. That evening after the dinner hour, Sella sat across from me at the corner table with the accounts put away and a candle between us. Outside, the first serious snow of winter had begun, heavy, quiet, the kind that settles. The Greymark was warm and low-lit. The fire banked well, the room sparse at this hour. "Tell me about Veldrath," she said. So I did. I told her about the council, the names, the personalities, the ones who would be a challenge and the ones who would be useful, and the ones who were primarily interested in doing the right thing if shown clearly what it was. I told her about the capital city, Veldenmoor, its size, its seasons, the smell of the river in spring. I told her about the great hall where I had spent 19 years holding court, which was grander than the Greymark in every physical sense, and had never once in 19 years felt as steady. She listened the way she listened to everything, entirely without performing it. "What will they do with me?" she said, not anxiously, practically. "Whatever you decide to do," I said. The Luna's role in Veldrath is not well defined because there hasn't been one for 19 years. That means it is, largely, yours to define. "I want to keep working," she said. "All right. I mean actually working, not ceremonially." "I understand the distinction," I said. "I also prefer actual work. We will get on." "I'll need to arrange for Marit and Dav," she said. "Someone needs to manage the Greymark. I can't simply leave it." "Of course not," I said. "We can come back, regularly if you want. This is your hold. It's under Veldrath's protection. It seems appropriate that the Luna of Veldrath has a reason to visit it." She considered this. "That's surprisingly reasonable," she said. "I have my moments," I said. The almost smile again. "The king part," she said. "I meant what I said. It will take time." "I know," I said. "Take it. I don't know how to be a Luna." "You know how to hold a room," I said. "You know how to manage people with different needs without losing the truth of what you're doing. You know how to give your last bread to someone who needs it and still eat breakfast. There is not a great deal about being a Luna that requires more than that." She was quiet for a moment. "You've been watching me for 3 weeks," she said. "Yes," I said. "And you decided from watching me run an inn in ungoverned territory that I would make a good queen." "I decided from watching you run an inn in ungoverned territory," I said, "that you were already doing the thing that matters. Being a Luna doesn't mean doing something different. It means doing what you do at a larger table." She looked at the candle between us. The mark on her wrist was fully warm now, the pattern complete. The bond settled into something that was no longer a question and had become simply a fact. The way the fire is a fact when you stop thinking about whether it will go out and simply sit in its warmth. "All right," she said, for the 4th and last time that week. I named her Luna before I left Caldenmoor. This was not the formal ceremony. That would come in Veldrath, with the council and the court, all of it proper and witnessed. But the envoys were still in the hold when I did it, which was deliberate on my part, because I wanted there to be witnesses with rank, and because I wanted it to be said in Caldenmoor, where it was true, before it was said anywhere else. I stood in the common room of the Greymark with the 7 envoys present and the room full around them, and I said, "Sella of the Greymark, keeper of Caldenmoor, is my fated mate and my Luna. The bond is recognized and witnessed. Her hold is protected. Her governance stands." I looked at Corson and Vale and the Drenvar pair in turn. "You will carry that back to your principals as clearly as you carry the protected status declaration." Corson did the slight bow of a man who is absorbing more information than he expected on a diplomatic trip. Vale, who was, I thought, genuinely intelligent, looked at Sella for a long moment, and then looked at me, and the expression on her face was something close to professional admiration. "Well," she said, "that explains the arrangement." "The arrangement stands on its own merits," I said. "I know," she said. "I said it explains it, not that it invalidates it." She turned to Sella. "You have a difficult council ahead of you." "I expect so," Sella said. "You'll manage," Vale said. She said it the way one competent person says it to another, direct, no cushion, and entirely meant. I stayed 3 more days. Not because there was governance work remaining. The declarations had been sent, the envoys had departed, the hold was settled. I stayed because Sella had asked me to, which she had done in the same quiet way she did everything, not as a request but as a fact. 3 more days, I think. said while going over accounts without looking up, and I had said, yes, and that had been that. On the last morning, I came down early again and found her in the kitchen. She was making bread. The flour shipment had come in from the mill. She was working it in the particular efficient way she did everything. No wasted motion, no performance, and the kitchen smelled of warmth and yeast and pine resin from the fire. She didn't look up when I came in. She said, "Tea's on." I poured myself tea. I sat at the kitchen table. I watched her work. After a while she said, "I've been thinking about merit." "She can manage the Greymark," I said. "I'd like to propose a formal management stipend from Veldrath's Protected Status Fund, which would be the appropriate." "I know," she said. "I've already spoken to her. She's willing if the stipend is adequate. I told her it would be." "It will be," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you as an information transfer, not as a request." "Understood," I said. She worked the bread in silence. Outside, the snow had stopped and the morning light was coming in pale and clear, the kind of winter light that makes everything look like it has been cleaned. The pass would be open today. We would leave mid-morning. "I'm going to miss it," she said, not sadly, practically. As a fact, stated so it would be known. "We'll come back," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm still going to miss it when we're not here." "Yes," I said, "that seems right." She shaped the bread and set it to rise and wiped her hands on her apron. She turned around and looked at me across the kitchen table. The same gray eyes, the same attentive, reading expression. The face that had been still because stillness was useful, and was now, I thought, still simply because it was hers. "The person part," she said. I said I knew that part. "Yes," I said. "I still do," she said. "The king part, I'm working on it, but the person part I know." I set down my cup. "That's enough," I said. "That's more than enough." She nodded. She came around the table and stood beside me, and looked out the window at the pale winter morning, the snow on the Greymark's yard, the smoke from the chimney of the mill. I did not put my arm around her. I did not do anything except sit beside her and look out the same window. After a moment she set her hand on the table beside mine, and I turned my hand and held hers, the marks on our wrists warm in the morning light, the bond settled and quiet and entirely certain, the way it had been since the kitchen, since the bread, since the moment a wolf that had been searching for 6 months found what it was looking for and went still. Outside, the Greymark's lamp was still burning in the window, the same lamp that had been burning when I rode down out of the Grenells 4 weeks ago, and followed the light across the dark, and found a room full of people and a woman who held the peace of an ungoverned place together with nothing but her own steadiness. It was still lit. I had gone in to see what was worth protecting. I had found something that did not need me to protect it, only to stand beside it, which is a different thing, and I think the better thing. We rode out of Caldenmore at mid-morning, Sella on a gray horse she had named, characteristically practical. The pass was open and the light was sharp, and the road ahead was the road to Veldrath, where there was a council I would need to manage and a Luna who would need no one to manage her. I looked back once. The Greymark's lamp was still burning in the window. I thought, I came in to find what was worth protecting in an ungoverned stretch of land between 3 kingdoms. I found that it was already protected by the steadiest person I had ever watched work. What was left for me to do was very simple. I turned back to the road. Beside me, Sella was already looking forward.